Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Tuesday, February 17th. A wildly popular Derek VanRiper here with an always popular Eno Sarris. On this episode, we got three more team previews coming up. We're going to dig into our 2026 outlooks for the Orioles, Brewers, and Rockies. But we got some big baseball news you should know as we get started on this Tuesday. A bombshell dropping Tuesday morning. Ken Rosenthal, Andy McCullough, and Evan Drellick reporting that Tony Clark is expected to resign from his position as the executive director of the Major League Baseball Players Union. He's led that group since 2013. And this all kind of started with an abrupt cancellation of Clark's scheduled visit to Guardians camp on Tuesday morning. There's the first stop on MLBPA's scheduled spring tour. A lot of reporting happening in the few hours since the story first broke, and we've had a few players from the executive subcommittee talk to reporters at The Athletic. One of them, Mets infielder Marcus Semien, told reporters that Clark's decision stemmed from the federal probe from the Eastern District of New York, which was reviewing whether MLBPA officials use licensing money or equity to improperly enrich themselves. That story first broke back in the fall. So in some ways, this has been simmering on the back burner as something that could go down, but with the CBA expiring at the end of this season, the timing is really important to think about.
Yeah, I think they had to do this now, if it was going to happen, because any closer that it gets to the impending lockout that'll happen after the season, and that whole discussion, the worse it gets for the union. So they needed to get somebody that they could get to know, I think, as a voting bloc, somebody they could trust, somebody that they could go to battle with per se. When it goes down this off season after this season. But the clouds were gathering, and I think, I don't want to speak for you, but for me, I was like, this seemed like this might be an inevitable conclusion of what was going to happen with Tony Clark's presidency, because there was enough smoke. And I don't want to say that I know that the fire is there, but the allegations are so precise and specific and varied. There's this thing called Player's Way that he created that had a $27 million budget this year and paid a handful of players who had full-time jobs elsewhere to put on these sparsely attended events that, were supposedly an oasis for young athletes and families who too often get exploited in today's billion-dollar youth sports machinery. So, but these events were sparsely attended and didn't really seem to have an overall basis, except for, possibly, allegedly paying these possibly important former players extra salaries, being basically a slush fund for them. As for the other allegations that go beyond this, they're a little bit harder to understand, because there is a third company called One Team that has elements of the NFLPA, the MLBPA, and now women's college. I think women's college basketball. And so there's a bunch of different unions involved in this, and it's a way to sort of together bargain for monetize athletes' image and likeness to do these deals, these licensing deals. And it's been wildly popular and successful. The One Team Partners itself is worth over $1 billion now. The problem is that allegedly, again, Tony Clark gave himself equity in this company and gave other union executives equity in this company. So again, there's a thing that's like, we're paying you to be the leader of the Major League Baseball union, and you have given people second jobs in these slush fund things and given them equity in this third company and giving yourself equity in this third company. It looks pretty improper. And I think that it was improper enough that it led to his resignation, and they had to do it in time to get somebody new in place before the rest of this goes down.
Yeah, and I saw a report from Sam Blum, who spoke to Brent Suter, now a pitcher for the Angels, also a member of the executive subcommittee that Marcus Semien is a part of in the Players Association. Suter cited the upcoming bargaining sessions, which are expected to begin this summer as the union's priority. The MLBPA hopes to keep everything as stable as we can this year, according to Suter. The most obvious candidate would be Deputy Director Bruce Meyer, who was already set to be the union's lead negotiator.
Bruce Meyer is a lawyer that is a bulldog, and I don't know that this changes anything about what's going on forward. But there really was no way forward with Tony Clark, as we're seeing now with the most recent revelations that are coming in while we're recording this. As first reported by ESPN, Tony Clark had an improper relationship with his sister-in-law that had a job at the union. This just doesn't seem like there's any way they could go forward with Tony Clark. So we'll have to see how they go forward with Bruce Meyer, into this new battle.
I think bigger changes within the players' union are likely coming after the CBA, based on what we know right now anyway. But a lot to monitor, and of course we'll be covering that at The Athletic here in the days, weeks, and months ahead. To get to some other baseball news you should know, we got an update on Pablo López, and it's not good. There is a tear in his UCL, according to Aaron Gleeman. He is now facing season-ending surgery. A second opinion will be received before a determination like that is made. You started poking around looking for recent forearm strains, trying to figure out how often a forearm strain turns into something worse, and, well, what you found was not very encouraging.
Well, yeah, we had some peer-reviewed research that just looked at incidences of forearm strains and then looked at how many people had Tommy John afterwards, and it looked like it was a precursor. But just here's the anecdotal evidence. In 2024, here are some forearm strains. Lucas Erceg, Reynaldo Lopez, who was out for a long time, John Means, surgery, Javier Assad, I believe there's surgery there, Frankie Montas, surgery, Braxton Garrett, surgery, Nick Mears, Chris Paddock, Orion Kirkering, Jacob Latz, Bowden Francis, surgery. Sonny Gray shows up twice in 2024, once with a forearm strain and a second time with flexor tendonitis. I had thought to myself that Sonny Gray had a clean bill of health, but that was a little eye-opening for me. Last year's forearm strains and flexor strains were Graham Ashcraft, Davis Martin, Bergert, Jacob Lopez. We're not even sure he's fully healthy from that. Ryan Weathers, Trevor Megill, and Logan Gilbert. I hate to sound the alarm too hard. One thing that we don't know is sort of the timing. Those guys could have a good season and then have Tommy John next year. And it's pretty hard to, pick a body part and have someone be totally clean. That said, this list seems a little bit more worrisome now than it did even yesterday.
It's how it goes this time of year, of course. But yeah, I think the severity of the strain matters, even a grade 1 versus a grade 2. Maybe that grade 1 can heal up and you can still go for a while before it causes another problem. Grade 2 might lead to those worse outcomes on a more frequent basis. But Pablo Lopez facing season-ending surgery. The other news that we didn't talk about coming out of the weekend, Nick Castellanos ended up landing with the Padres. We wondered if the combination of limited defensive value, the declines he's shown at the plate, and of course the incidents we talked about on Friday, including the time he brought a beer into the dugout and got into verbal arguments with his manager and his coaches in Philadelphia. We wondered if that might just be enough to lead teams to say they weren't interested, but the Padres jumped in pretty quickly. And as you look at this San Diego depth chart, a lot has changed just in the last week or so as far as the way the bench looks, because they may have Castellanos in a position to mostly small side platoon with Gavin Sheets at first base if Castellanos picks up that position quickly and proves that he can handle it, and could obviously be part of the DH mix depending on the health of Miguel Andujar. He could be part of the outfield mix if Ramon Laureano has more injury trouble. So for depth purposes at the league minimum, this did seem like one of the short list of teams where he presents an upgrade over what they had on their bench prior to bringing him in.
I think he's done a pretty brilliant job. AJ Preller he's got an extension, and all the players are pretty happy. I mean, the players are pretty happy because he will sign deals that give them tons of money. But they also were happy. Like Manny Machado, who is childhood friends with Nick Castellanos, was happy that they brought Nick in. And, the way he put it was, we got a $20 million player for cents on the dollar. I might quibble with that description.
No, I think you got more like a $5 to $7 million guy. Like some of the free agents we talked about who had signed at first base and DH in the last couple of weeks, if you comp Castellanos to those guys who just got new deals in the last month or so, things would look a lot different compared to the multi-year deal Castellanos signed with the Phillies, right? I think that's probably the way you should be really looking at Nick Castellanos.
Yeah, that's not a bad way to put it. And, this is a team that has had, Tatis has had injuries in the past. Machado, who is an Iron Man, has started to run into some stuff. So, it's good to build some redundancy there. And with Andujar and Castellanos, that is pretty good redundancy at first base, DH, and maybe even in a pinch in the corner outfield. So, I think they did a pretty good job with the money there. And, what's also interesting for a team that is projected to be, sort of 12th or 13th best in the big leagues, so around 500, they do offer more opportunity to some of these signings than other teams. By focusing on the stars, they left their depth spots as opportunities to sort of grab these maybe near replacement, but above replacement cheap players. The way I can describe this is, they've got Nick Pivetta and Michael King and Joe Musgrove at the top of the rotation, but we all could see how wide open the back of that rotation was. And that led some of us in the fantasy space to go get JP Sears. And I think he'll still be useful and he might beat out a lot of these guys. But if you are, the agent for somebody that wants to start, and I had been saying, I think Walker Buehler could have gotten a major league deal as a reliever, but he still wants to start. So he took a minor league deal to go to the San Diego Padres. And Griffin Canning got signed on like a $1 million deal. And German Marquez signed on a very small deal. So now, it's an open competition. All those guys feel like they're betting on themselves. And they're going to get major league opportunity this year, maybe 100, 150 innings if they beat out the right guys. And Randy Vasquez has options. I don't actually know if Sears has options. I need to look at this right now. Sears has an option. Oh my God, he could end up in the minor leagues again. But if they become the depth, and it's Canning on the IL, Marquez and Buehler at 4 and 5. That's better than I would have thought if you'd told me how much he spent. So I guess that's a good way to describe it, the Padres bench.
Well, and I think Ty France got added to that mix too. So you could see a possible redundancy if you keep both Castellanos and France, depending on how healthy everybody is. So maybe that's an ongoing battle because France is also there as a non-roster invite. And I think at a league minimum cost, if you don't like what you see in terms of talent, if you don't like the fit, which it sounds like that relationship with Machado will actually go a long way for Castellanos in that clubhouse, it's easy to cut ties for a player on the league minimum. So yeah, the Padres, never boring, and we'll have them as one of our team previews coming up next week. We'll try to get Dennis Lin to join us for that one. Let's get back to some team previews, though. As I mentioned up top, an interesting trio of teams, Orioles, Brewers, and Rockies. There's absolutely no rhyme or reason to why those three teams specifically are put together, but I've been asked in the Discord and on the YouTube comments, why are these teams put together this way? Here's how the sausage is made. We are trying to get as many of the teams we cover to have the writer that covers them join us on the show if their schedule allows them to. On the days where we can't get those writers, we cover teams that we do not cover with individual beat writers. And then I try to combine them in a way where we get one team from one of the Eastern divisions, one from the Central, and one from the West, just to kind of spread it out in terms of what we're looking at. Ideally, at least one team each from the AL and NL in any group of three. Will I break those rules at some point? Yes, because it's impossible to sustain all of those rules simultaneously. But that's how we landed on these three teams. And starting with the Orioles today, I think it's funny. The fun fact comes first on the Orioles. We looked at this team and said they had too many hitters last year. Last season, they were tied for 19th in WRC+. They put up a 96, and I realize that's with Gunnar Henderson being banged up all year. Bless you. That's with Adley Rutschman playing at less than 100% and Tyler O'Neill being hurt. And I think when you think about the injury issues that Rutschman's had really for 2 years running and O'Neill's had for his whole career, and you think about a below average lineup a season ago, it begins to nudge you in the direction of saying, oh, maybe that's why they felt like they needed bats, plural, and that's why they spent the money to bring in Pete Alonso, and that's why they traded Grayson Rodriguez to get Taylor Ward, right? I mean, those are two guys that you would expect to be firmly in their group of five of guys they're going to put out there each and every day, and two guys that should be difference makers and maybe help propel this lineup back towards top 10 or possibly even top 5 status with some favorable health outcomes.
Now, by the Bat X, they have, what is this, 8, 9, 10 above average hitters by WRC Plus projected. Some of it was they just had, poor seasons last year, some of the hitters. Gunnar was hurt, as we know about his shoulder impingement. Somebody like Tyler O'Neill, who has a 117, the Bat X WRC Plus production, was hurt all year and has come into camp, mea culpaing about it. But we already, it's already happened again with Jackson Holiday being hurt. So I think it's just, it's redundancy. The best teams have a good option behind a great option. And I think that's what these Orioles are doing. They're focusing mostly on hitting, and then I think on the pitching side, it's like a more expensive version of the Brewers in that they're like, we're not going to sign these pitchers to long-term deals, and we're going to have a lot of short-term deal guys in play, and we're going to be as good as our pitching in some ways. Like we're gonna go with the high variance pitching and low variance hitting, and I think that's the idea, if I had to sum it up.
Yeah, it's a good summary overall. I think just to kind of close the book on hitting, not like rushing through it or anything, but I think Gunnar with health can bounce back to 2024 levels, right? We talked about him on the shortstop preview. Pete Alonso strikes me as a guy where you're more worried about the lack of familiarity with the AL East pitchers he'll see most often and just being in the AL as a whole versus the pressure of the contract. It doesn't strike me as a guy that feels that kind of pressure. It's just making the adjustment to things that are different. Should be generally fine where he's been going. Ward should be solid. Adley Rutschman and Samuel Basallo and how they share playing time between catcher, maybe first base, and DH too, depending on how all the pieces come together, I think is going to be really interesting, right? Like they may DH Alonso and play one of their catchers at first, but it's maybe 3 guys for 3 spots if, and this is a big if you're willing to just push Ryan Mountcastle to some kind of small side platoon, general sort of bench usage, or maybe just push him off the roster entirely. I mean, sometimes surprising things happen late in spring. If you have a healthy position player group, someone else doesn't, they come calling and you give up a little bit of depth on the pitching side and the hitting side and you get back a reliever or something. So I think you have to really tell yourself a story going into your draft about how playing time flows with those catchers to really understand how the rest of their group of 5 actually comes together. And the other part of this is Jordan Westburg's banged up already too, and he's been banged up a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, they may not even get to opening day fully operational. They may have to have Kobe Mayo playing third and Blaze Alexander at second on opening day. And if that's the case, then Mountcastle has a place to play, I think, at least in the short term. It does get harder as everybody comes back, but what's to say that people come back and other people get hurt, So, I think that there's going to be something there. Rutschman is fascinating just because every projection system loves him. Like there's no projection system that doesn't love him. He had a 103 WRC plus in 2024. He had a 91 WRC plus last year, Adley Rutschman did. And there's no projection system worse than ATC with a 107. So they all see a bounce back just because the component stats lie a certain way, the walk rate, the strikeout rate, the demonstrated power in the past. They just see this as an opportunity for him to bounce back to sort of 260, 340 in terms of OBP and 20 homers from Adley Rutschman. So, you know, it is interesting to think that when you're at a draft and nobody wants Adley Rutschman, that all the projection systems love him. And there's something about that that's true for all of these hitters. Like the projection systems really love him. Taylor Ward, nobody loves him in drafts. 118 WRC plus projection, 27 homers from the Bat X. So this is a great team. And, you know, I think one question is, you know, when it comes to like what the depth chart looks like, you know, what's the 5? I mean, it's hard because there's so many good players. You almost want to now anoint a bunch of people the 5, but you know, Gunner's in the 5. I think Alonso's in the 5 in terms of players that play every day. Taylor Ward is in the 5. I think that's 3. I think when Holiday's healthy, that's 4. I think when Westberg's healthy, that's 5. And we haven't even gotten to Rutschman and center and right and DH.
So I guess the question is, how much do you shave off? If you're going to push 6 or 7 guys out there every day, who's actually losing? Guys that either are prospects that we like, Mayo, I think who you mentioned before, O'Neill, who's on year 2 of a 3-year deal that's not cheap. You know, there's someone's going to lose if there's health. And I guess that's the huge if, right? Like maybe it just solves itself in a lot of ways.
I mean, it could be Basayo. And I'm just trying to envision futures that haven't happened yet. And I could see one where Basayo goes back down, because in that future they find a more of a caddy catcher, like a guy who's, I don't know if it's Maverick Handley or whatever, but you know, they find a catcher that's just going to be a second catcher, and Rutschman is a, you know, traditional catcher 1, and they want to play Beavers and O'Neill, right? And Mountcastle is the caddy for Beavers and O'Neill, and that's good enough. So you don't need Basayo up.
I know that's in the range of outcomes, and I'm trying to decide who I think is more likely to open the year at AAA between Basayo and Mayo, and I think it's Mayo. Even though Basayo's younger, they gave Basayo the extension. How often
I just
do you
think
give
with the injuries, it's Mayo, so that complicates things.
Yeah, maybe it's just Mayo's temporary. I guess what I mean by getting sent down to start the season, it's once everyone's healthy. Once Holiday is back and then they have the roster crunch. Like, I think the use case of Basayo being able to
I think Mayo is worse. I'm making the case that Basayo is also down almost. You know what I mean?
So you think there's a chance that happens. I mean, it happens if he struggles for sure, because he's young enough where that can happen. But he's played enough at AAA, and he's just put up such convincing numbers in terms of hitting the ball really hard. 23 homers in 76 games, controlled the strike zone well at AAA last year.
I like him.
I don't know, man. I like him a lot.
I just wanted to add that there's possibly some risk there that we're not assessing right. I mean, for example, the Bat X projects Basayo as like the 12th best Oriole.
Yeah. I guess the good news, though, when you're built like this, even if you're not the Dodgers, you have the benefit, the luxury of saying, hey, you know, Jackson Holiday with your hamate surgery, you don't have to try and return on the minimum, because we have the little buffer. Like, take the extra couple of weeks. Make sure you're feeling good. Make sure you're not playing through a lot of pain coming back, and then come back and take a step forward, because we feel like we have enough depth to withstand injuries like that. So maybe that's part of the reason things are built this way as well. The pitching side, though, is where I think there are greater questions, just in terms of quality. A lot of shuffling here. I think just having a healthy season from Kyle Bradish could be huge. It gives him a true number 1 based on stuff. There might be some light restrictions on his workload. I did see a report of that scanning through RotoWire earlier in the day on Tuesday, but that's not shocking for a guy coming off TJ. I just don't think it's going to be as tight of a restriction as you'd see on a 22-year-old coming off of TJ by comparison. You and I have discussed the struggles of Shane Baz at Steinbrenner Field last year. I think better days are largely ahead for him in the big leagues, so I'm generally optimistic about his outlook for this year. I think he gives them something behind Bradish that maybe no one else in that rotation offers, and that's the ceiling you're looking for from someone who starts a potential playoff game. Maybe Trevor Rogers has that too. It's not the premium velocity that we like to see from a starter, but he did regain some of the lost velocity he had from his own time on the shelf. But I think that's sort of the lingering question for me. They have depth now in this rotation. You know, you have Dean Kramer, you have Zach Eflin. You know, you have guys you can throw out there that are are just good starters. But what happens come playoff time, and obviously the addition of Chris Bassett also helps them a lot just from an innings perspective too. He's definitely a get them there guy, but is he someone you want starting game 2 or game 3 of a playoff series? I think that's sort of the question that needs to be answered between now and October if the Orioles get there.
Yeah, it feels like they want Boz, Rogers, and Bradish healthy for the playoffs, and Bassett, Eflin, Kramer, Wells, Povich can all be role players on a staff that the bullpen is not a big strength of theirs. I like Kittredge some, and Keegan Aiken has been good as a reliever. Cano's all right. Helsley's underrated. But could you use Povich as a situational lefty in the playoffs? Yes. Could Dean Kramer's stuff play up in single inning outings, and could he pass somebody like an Aiken or Cano or something? Yes. So it's a decent rotation. If we're going to give them an off-season grade, I might ding them because I just think like a Fromber would look better at the top of this instead of Bassett. He ended up going on a short-term deal, so that you can't even use the excuse that they didn't want to sign him for 6 years. Maybe Fromber just chose Detroit over Baltimore, but I think he would have just been a seamless orange to orange transition there, and I think it would have made me feel better about their playoff rotation, as opposed, when it comes to how many games they'll win and how they'll do. I think this is a decent staff that'll get them there.
Yeah, bullpen questions maybe are there a little bit too, just in terms of depth especially, but Ryan Helsley, I think we're all sort of expecting a rebound from him after what happened last year, especially after the trade to the Mets. Just did not look like the same guy, battled some issues with pitch tipping, but he was brought in and signed the kind of contract that sets him up to opt out and go back and get a 3 or a 4 year deal as one of the best relievers on the market next winter, if he has the type of season that he and many of us are expecting. So I did like that signing quite a bit to really shore that up because of the unfortunate major injury for Felix Bautista, because that was a huge hole for a team that has playoff aspirations, and they actually went out and filled it without going to the very top for Edwin Diaz or for Devin Williams.
Yeah, it might work out for them that Helsley's great. He leaves and Bautista comes back. Although I will say that Bautista's arm slot is so extreme that I think it has contributed to his injury. On the other hand, this bullpen, is good enough, probably, and it actually mirrors their starting staff, I think, in that it's slightly underrated, and maybe people will look past it. This is a good team. They're going to score a lot of runs. I think they'll be able to laugh off the Holiday injury, and I think they've built enough redundancy to win a lot of games. So if we've got the PECOTA, you said the PECOTA win projection from Baseball Perspectives is 83.1. That's too cold for me, man. That is too cold for me. I think this is a 88, 89, 90 win team.
I got burned last year thinking the Orioles were going to make good on their promise, and I'm going to double down on it too. I think it's a little bit too cold. AL East is really, really tough. Maybe it's more like 87 wins. Maybe they're the last team in as far as the AL wildcards go, but hey, last team in is all you need. You just need to punch your ticket and get a chance to go. But I could definitely see it. I like the way the hitter group has been held together, even though we've been calling for trades for a long, long time. And I just think my optimism long-term about Shane Baz goes all the way back to his time with the Rays. This could be the year he takes a big step forward, and that could be just huge for this Orioles team if that happens. I'll throw the B- grade on their offseason. It's a very strange grade, but actually a pretty good grade based on the early ones we've given out so far. I think we've been pretty stingy with how we've felt about a lot of the front office work that's gone down over the course of the winter. I thought moving on from Grayson Rodriguez was, like, as much as a baseball move could be courageous, I think that was actually a courageous thing to do, because having that high ceiling pitching that you could have for several years, if it works out, and giving that up for a guy that you may only have for 1 year. I mean, Taylor Ward makes sense as someone you could give a qualifying offer and get some draft pick compensation if he leaves at the end of the season. That's still a big possible mark against you. If Grayson Rodriguez goes to the Angels, gives them 150 plus innings of ace-like ratios as we've thought he could do in the past, then that trade ends up looking really bad for this front office. But they got a really solid player back in Ward, so maybe the short-term win is good enough to offset the possible long-term loss.
The Shane Baz one too. They just re-upped with another Florida team and got a starter. And if Baz has the same first year that Rogers did, there's going to be some belly aching, especially if Rogers himself regresses some as we expect. So, I could see we could look back on this and be like, whoops, like that was a really bad offseason. They got Baz and he's not been anything good, and Rogers sucks. And can they win a trade in Baltimore? And look at Grayson over there. They're making really bad deals. But I do think it's, it is interesting they've kept their core in place. They've identified players that they think are, they don't want to trade, and they've been okay with trading other guys, and they've taken aggressive stances. The adding Pete Alonso was a really surprising move for me, especially when I thought, what if they didn't get Pete Alonso and they did get Fromber and they got a cheaper first baseman? First base has been such a cheap part of the market. Was there a better way through than that? So that's why I'm not going to give him an A or an A-, but I'll give him a solid B, because like you said, they were aggressive and they have an ethos.
A few fantasy favorites here. Do you got an underrated bat in this group?
Well, I'm nervous because we just talked about how many players on this team are full-time players, and it seems pretty obvious that Colton Cowser will not be. It's hard to get him into the rule of 5. So Colton Cowser is maybe not the best fit for weekly leagues, but I just wanted to point out that he has a really good set of skills in that he barreled the ball well last year. He hit the ball really hard last year in terms of max EV and hard hit. He was really good at discerning balls and strikes. If you'd use zone minus reach, zone minus O swing percentage as a judge of his plate skills, he had defensive value. He had base running value. If you use those things that I just mentioned as a comp, and you use his age, as a limiting factor, because Colton Cowser right now is 25 years old. So you say 25 and under with 800 innings, with a good barrel rate, a good max EV, good hard hit, good zone minus 0, above 0 base running, above 0 defense. I know that's a lot of aspects, but if I'm going to describe to you like a good player, I want them to do all those things. I want them to play defense. I want them to run. I want them to have good plate discipline, hit the ball hard, right? So I have left K percentage out, and that's the thing he's not good at. And so, if you do that, if you do all those comps, of course, the major leaguers you get that have played that much, they don't have good strikeout rates, but they're interesting players. Trevor Story, they're up right now. The comps are up right now. Trevor Story and Brandon Marsh. Very few comps for Cowser, which, does suggest that maybe he's a sort of boom or bust type guy. But he's an almost exact match for Trevor Story through age 25. They both had 8-9% walk rates, 30% K rates. They both were positives on defense and with base running. They both had double-digit barrel rates, 112.5 max EV for Story, 113.7 for Cowser, 43% hard hit rate for Story, 46% for Cowser. I mean, if it works out for Cowser, it looks a lot like Trevor Story.
And that ends up being a really good roto player. That's what he is. I know the swing and miss overall is the main concern and possible platoon risk, but I think outside the top 200 overall is where he's reliably gone in February, sometimes in the 240, 250 range. You could do a lot worse than Colton Cowser at that price. So I think you've made a pretty good case for him both today and in the outfield preview a couple of weeks ago. Adley Rutschman still jumps off the page to me as the underrated bat here. I just think if you're trusting projections in a general sense, it's hard to look at where he's going between 130 and 180 overall in 2 catcher leagues and say you're going to pass on that. So he's I waited for catcher, and I still want a top 6, top 7 guy potentially at the position option. So Rutschman for me makes sense as a healthy bounce back candidate here in 2026. Underrated sleeper starting pitcher. If you didn't pick up on it before, Shane Baz is my choice for that one. I'm curious, you have Trevor Rogers versus Shane Baz chart on our rundown. I want to know what that means. How did you compare these two guys? Because they don't seem similar to me at all.
Well, I want Shane Baz too, so that's
that's what this is about. Okay.
That's what this is about. But I made this chart, and it's a simple chart with the new Stuff Plus numbers that just shows what they throw, and their Stuff Plus, their Location Plus, their Pitching Plus, and Rogers was a lefty, and that subset did get revised upwards. But if you look at his set of options, the four seam, the change, and the sweeper are decent pitches. They are 101 pitching plus pitches. The sweeper's a 108. They're decent pitches. Why isn't the sweeper higher? Because he doesn't locate it that awesomely, and also he's a lefty throwing a big platoon split sweeper. So he's got 3 average-ish pitches. Shane Baz has like maybe 2 plus pitches and an above average pitch. When I put these charts next to each other, if I didn't know anything else about them, I would pick Baz over Rogers. And I haven't even brought in ADP, right?
Yeah, about a 40 pick difference in February on average.
Yeah, so if you're going to give me 3 rounds of value where I'm picking other people, and then I take Baz later than Rogers, it's a no-brainer for me. We'll see how this one plays out, but for the people who were like saying that, oh yeah, like Rogers is great and we should, you missed on him last year and, this and that. I mean, he has a 3.83 ERA for his career and a 130 whip for his career. So he really has had 2 good years and 2 mediocre years and 2 really bad years. So
yeah, and some of that mediocre and bad. Like, he was pretty hurt for a lot of the bad and mediocre.
But why couldn't he be hurt again?
Well, yeah, maybe it's more injury risk than skills risk, or when he's pitching hurt and loses a tick or two, it really has a heavy impact on what he's able to do. So, yeah, I get the reservations on Rogers at the price. If he falls a little bit and they're equal price, then I think it becomes a more difficult decision. As far as the bullpen goes, my use case here is very limited. But Tyler Wells, if you're just in a deep enough league where pitcher, just a general P for the 9th spot helps you, I think Tyler Wells ticks that box. So we're thinking more like end of draft and holds or AL only leagues in this case. Just a really good pitcher when healthy, but that's the operative word. He's missed a lot of time with injuries in his career. Career 3.98 ERA and 1.03 whip. So inexpensive whip, probably in a bulk relief role for most of the year. So that's what I think Tyler Wells can bring for really deep leagues.
Ryan Helsley with himself. I mean, it's weird to call the closer the underrated sleeper reliever, but he's got a 109 ADP, and I think he has the skills to bang with the guys who are ahead of him. And so, if you're looking at Devin Williams and Bednar and Hoffman, a lot of those guys have, frankly, lost their jobs in the last 2 years. And so is Ryan Helsley, but, I like Ryan Helsley's peripherals maybe better than some of those.
Well, he's jumped up, though, in the Draft Champions Leagues. He's at 62 in February. So he has finally caught up on price compared to some of the guys that were going ahead of him.
Yeah. So it is a draft-to-draft thing for sure. But I think he belongs at least in that group of 60, and so that gives a little bit more robustness to the second tier of closers. And I don't know, the second tier closers is a really risky place to shop. But Elsie for me does not actually feel as risky as some of the other guys there.
No, stuff is electric when he's on, so I totally also get it.
My theory of the sort of pitch tipping and all that, I think it's just really hard to change in season. We saw this with Jesus Luzardo, where he was, he fixed it, but then it did other things to him. And, Trevor May was talking about how he's frustrated about where the first base coach is, standing and how they're changing that to get better looks into what he's doing. I think that an off season is the time to fix tipping. I think it's really hard to do when you've got a game tonight.
And we saw that with David Bednar too during, I think that was the 2024 season now. Let's shift the focus over to Milwaukee. A lot of changes, not a lot of signings per se, but as far as the hitter group, Jet Williams in, Luis Rengifo recently signed. We haven't talked about that move. David Hamilton came back as part of the Caleb Durbin trade. They added Gary Sanchez for some depth behind the plate. Quietly signed Akil Baddoo at the very beginning of free agency. That's been completely forgotten about. On the outside of the bats, Durbin gone via trade, Rhys Hoskins, Isaac Collins traded away, a couple depth guys in Monasterio and Danny Jansen gone as well. And most of the money they spent was actually Brandon Woodruff accepting the qualifying offer. I mean, he gets a pretty big salary in 2026, and other pitchers they added via trade, of course. Kyle Harrison, Anel Zerpa, Brandon Sproat. Shane Drohan might get some big league run at some point this year. They lost Freddie Peralta in that trade with the Mets. Jose Quintana, Tobias Myers, Nick Mears all gone as well. So the type of turnover you expect for the Brewers, they're one of those teams that will just trade and shuffle up the roster year over year and try to find replacements at spots that, we leave ourselves in position to say, who's actually playing third base? And I think the addition of Rengifo, to me, it was kind of a big one, because maybe part of the reason they were willing to make the trade they made with the Mets, giving up Freddie Peralta and getting back Jet Williams and Brandon Sproat, was seeing a guy like Rengifo being an inexpensive free agent and thinking Caleb Durbin versus Luis Rengifo, pretty small difference, and the possibility of getting the replacement in someone like Williams or putting Williams in a different position and shuffling guys around gives them the kind of flexibility they want, where they're going to hit somewhere at third base, even if we can't see exactly how the plan comes together here in the middle of February.
Yeah, I was surprised when I did this chart. It shows the projections from the Bat X for Luis Rengifo versus Caleb Durbin. And Caleb Durbin is better at everything other than defense, which I did find that interesting. But not as much better than you think. It's a 267 to 252 in batting average, 339 to 307, 407 slugging to 388. Like I said, Rengifo better defense at third, which that fits the Brewers. Base running not that far off. If you look at the plate appearances projected, you realize that the difference in WAR projected is not that big. It's a difference. It's 600 plate appearances between 2.7 wins above replacement for Durbin and basically a flat 2-0 for Rengifo. So they feel like they gave up maybe a win this year. And the way that I see it, I guess, and I've been trying to make sense of it, because this is one of those deals, and it's always interesting when the deal hits me wrong, and I'm just like, yuck, why do they do this? And so I guess the way that I'm making sense of this is a two timelines team. This is a team that has the team that's on the field now, and then I'm sure they have people who are building the 2029 Brewers. And when you're building the 2029 Brewers, what do you want? That the Brewers have every year? Depth in the rotation and the starting pitching staff to be able to handle any types of injuries. Optional depth. The way that people build bullpens is the way the Brewers build their entire pitching staff. I didn't realize this until I made a chart for later in the episode where I put together all their back-end pitching options. All their back-end pitching options this year are great, and they all have options. So when you get Drohan and you get Kyle Harrison, you add to your depth. You have guys that are going to be your starting pitchers some years. One of these years. It doesn't have to be this year because they have options. So I think that's sort of what they were thinking. We don't take that much of a deep step back, and also, in the next grade, I'm not saying that this year's team won't be good, but in 2028 or 2029, the starting third baseman is Jesus Made or Cooper Pratt, or, there's a whole lot of options here that they have coming up. Jet Williams, So I guess they just, in the end, don't value Caleb Durbin as highly as I did, and, saw an opportunity to kind of smooth out their different timelines maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. Constantly just trying to play short and long game makes sense. They've had a lot of success doing it, so they're going to do it until it stops working, I guess. As far as the position player core goes, Bryce Terang, everyday player because of his glove, showed more power last year. I think 15 to 20 homers seems very reasonable with maybe a little room for more, but you don't have to pencil him in for more because he could make up any shortcomings in power with stolen bases. I think the fun fact I have for the Brewers is they're on their third first base coach in 3 seasons. So if they can get back to the efficiency they showed as a team stealing bases in 2024 with Spencer Allen now in that role, then that could be great for the likes of Terang and Churio. Healthier legs for Sal Frelick. He could run more. Maybe Yelich could steal a few extra bases. Maybe Rengifo with health ends up being part of that too. So
what's the 5 though? The 5 is
Terang, Churio, William Contreras, Yelich as the main DH, and probably Sal Frelick as number 5, I would say. But like that's
not what the projections say. It's interesting.
Who do you think the 5 is from your perspective?
Joey Ortiz.
You think it's Ortiz leapfrogging because of the defense at short?
Yeah, I think he just plays defense. Yeah, I think he's just their guy at short.
Well, it's a deep cut because a lot of people aren't in the league deep enough to even take the gamble, but we're in the middle of our listener league, which is 50 rounds, 12 teams. Like Joey Ortiz probably gets rostered in most of those leagues as a last-ditch depth for shortstop. Yeah, is there a world, like, I know you liked him going into last season. Like, did he do something so egregiously bad at the plate last year where you're just like writing off the possibility of a rebound back towards 2024 levels? I mean, he hit 11 homers, stole 11 bases that year. It was in 511 plate appearances, 20% K rate, 11% walk rate. Like, that's passable. It was a 105 WRC plus. Like, that is that impossible?
No, I don't think that's impossible. I think I'm shaving off some of the upside that I thought. Some of the ceiling gets shaved off by a year like this. But, he had a 260 batting average on balls in play last year. The year before was 283. I don't know why he can't put up a 300. He hits the ball hard enough. So if he hits the ball back, gets back to the near 40% hard hit rate, and he's making this much contact, why shouldn't he have a 300 BABIP? If he has a 300 BABIP, then he can hit 260, 10 homers, 15 stolen bases. It's a pretty good fill-in if you're starting guys hurt.
Yeah, I think you could make arguments for a few different guys in that spot. Ortiz, because of his defense, could be the guy, especially if his bat gets close to league average. Even if he's 5 or 10% worse than league average, and he plays defense like he did it short last year, then he cracks that group and they can mix and match a bit more in the corners and at first base. But you could see Andrew Vaughn, if he hits like he did early on in his time with the Brewers last year, maybe he just plays every day or nearly every day, and he ends up being 5th in plate appearances in this group. That's at least a possibility as well. I'm just curious, though, if you're throwing a dart at their third base situation, again, you can move guys around to your liking. If you're looking at Rengifo and Jet Williams in a redraft league right now, who are you more likely to throw the 2026 dart at?
The shallower my league is, the more likely I'm going to take Jet Williams.
Okay.
I think the upside is higher with a guy that's more of an unknown. Last year in the minor leagues, Jet Williams hit 17 homers and stole 34 bases with a 261 average, and was 66% better than league average. So that's something that I don't think Rengifo can do in the major leagues. Now, do I think that Jet Williams can do that in the major leagues? Probably not, but in a shallower league, I'd rather take that. In a deeper league, I'd take Rengifo because I think even if Jet Williams passes him, he probably has a role on the team. I don't think that they're the type of team that would just sign him to that contract and then release him. I think they would just turn him into more of a utility player, and might just be used I'm thinking draft and hold and stuff. Neither is on my shortest of lists of sleepers. I don't know. In some ways, I guess I could be saying I might pass on the situation.
Good. I think Rengifo probably gets the first crack at it. And as we talked about previously, when they traded Durbin away, it was Capra and Oliver Dunn that started at third base when last season began. So we didn't even know Durbin was the guy until a little ways in too. So yeah, it could just take a little time for Williams to sort of wrestle away his share of the job, and it could be someone else we're not even talking about right now too. You mentioned some of the prospects. There are options. That's the simplest way to say it. As far as the pitching goes, we've talked a lot about Brewers pitching over the course of this winter. I think we're both really into Jacob Misiorowski because why wouldn't you be? I think the main thing that we've landed on is like he threw more innings than you probably realized last year. So as far as dialing him back overall in terms of workload, they don't have to be extremely careful with him. Like it might just be his own inefficiency or the occasional, let's just take him out because we got a nice lead. He's pitched 5 innings. Like, let's just, give him a little breather. Like, it might be some more of that, kind of a softer approach to how they handle him rather than the clear kid glove sort of approach.
I mean, if they are cruising towards a spot, I think the risk might be maybe in head-to-head leagues where, August or September is spent, I've seen them do things where they ramp guys down to kind of three innings, for a couple starts. So it's a sort of soft ramp down and then the ramp up, to keep those innings out and keep them fresh for the postseason. So I could see them doing something like that. The Rays have done that with, like Rasmussen. They've played around with how many innings he pitches. So I think he'll end up with 150 innings. And I think with 150 innings, if you want somebody that could put together a Jake DeGrom season next year, it is Jacob Misiorowski.
I think the question for most people, I mean, you've talked about being a little pessimistic about Woodruff staying healthy. I'm a little more optimistic about what he can do on a per inning basis because he really changed his approach last year, has excellent command. Beyond Misiorowski and Woodruff, who, if anyone, among their starters do you find to be the most compelling fantasy-wise?
Well, I was going to do this in the underrated sleeper starting pitcher bit. That's what it says on the rundown, sir.
Oh, come on, just go. Just like this is what people are here for. They want to know which pitchers you have. The Brewers have 18 pitchers that they could use in their rotation this year, so they want to know who the third best option actually is.
So I put together this chart, and it's just stuff plus, location plus, projected ERA, and K percentage, and it's everybody that's not Priester, Woodruff, and Misiorowski that could pitch this year. And this was what was really eye-opening to me, is that these are all good pitchers. And Kyle Harrison in the updated model looks good. They're all projected for about a 3.8 to 4 ERA with an above-average strikeout rate. Sproat has the worst projected strikeout rate, but everybody else has an average or a better than average strikeout rate. You've got 3 lefties and 2 righties. You got breaking ball guys, changeup guys. You've got all sorts of different types of pitchers. They're all optionable. Like you can all option to the minor leagues. I just think that Chad Patrick, with the velo increase that he saw in relief, with the sort of established baseline, I think he's the safest thing there. So I think he's the 4. Looking at the rest of them, if Logan Henderson is healthy, he's the best pitcher of the 5. So I'm going to give him the 5 spot. And I'm gonna maybe have to do a mea culpa on Kyle Harrison this year if the model is correct, because it says he's a 107 pitching plus pitcher last year with a 3.95 projected ERA. That is way better than I expected, and maybe that was the key to the Durbin trade. But in any case, to me, it's Patrick and Henderson with Kyle Harrison, Routgasser, and Brandon Sproat in the minors as depth.
I think the biggest concern I have from the names you mentioned is that Logan Henderson dealt with a flexor strain last year.
Yeah,
thinking
about
where our conversation began. That's my main hesitation with drafting him where he goes. He's not ridiculously expensive. February ADP, the range is like pick 250 to 290. So it's not the end of the world if it ends up being a precursor to a bigger arm problem, but man, like that's the thing that's keeping the value down and maybe keeping me from wanting to have Logan Henderson all over a bunch of rosters.
I think in free agency leagues, he's a really good pick.
Yeah, that's probably the better approach with him. I think it's going to be interesting to see what they do with Brandon Sproat in the long run. I think maybe that's more of your May, June sort of addition to the rotation, and maybe they'll tweak a few things, send him down to Nashville, and then bring him up once they have to deal with some injuries. Like that might be the broader approach there. But I liked him a lot going into last season, and I think there's still a really good baseline of stuff for them to work with.
Yeah. I mean, it's a wide arsenal. Almost all of his pitches are regarded well by Stuff Plus, and the problem is similar with Gasser, is just really bad command so far, at least by the location numbers. And what I've heard from people like Tobias Myers is that the Brewers are more like the Rays in that they are a single target. Let everything rip to the middle of the zone and play off of that. I don't know exactly what the Mets, deal is in that regard. The Mets have done pretty well with, McLean, who doesn't yet have a plus natural command, and then Tong as well. So, I feel like Sproat has an excellent opportunity to jump ahead. I do think that if Logan Henderson, like for example, doesn't make it out of spring, I just get the vibe that Kyle Harrison would be next.
Yeah,
he's a little bit more polished. Maybe it's just sort of
a little more big league experience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had Henderson down as my underrated pitcher, but it just comes with that asterisk of elevated health concern given why he missed time a season ago. So you're on Patrick, I'm on Henderson. I think we both kind of like both. I think this is a team you have a high level of organizational trust, and I think relatively speaking, the draft market doesn't push this group as high as it could because there's so much role uncertainty that the hierarchy is always a little bit unclear. What would you give Matt Arnold and his front office for an off-season grade? I'm very curious.
I don't give him a good one. I know I'm trying to investigate myself and investigate this feeling that I had about that deal, but I don't like that deal. I'm trying to give
that deal.
him
Which one?
much.
It made several.
I don't like the Durbin deal. I don't like the Durbin deal at all. I think they had a better team before the Durbin deal. Maybe they're more nervous about Logan Henderson's arm health, like they needed Kyle Harrison, but they had Gasser and Sproat already. So I give him a C.
I had a B on there. It's just from the years of trust. I think this is what happens. Alan Chen, loyal listener of the show, was asking us if there are Lodem teams. Yes, there are. The Rays, the Guardians, the Brewers. I think they absolutely fit into the model spelled backwards and incorrectly sort of approach. And I think you see it reflected a lot of times in projections, just generally being a little more pessimistic about them relative to the success they actually have. It's not because the projection systems are bad. I mean, Pacoda's got an 81.1 win total on the Brewers, which when you think about some of the questions and the downside outcomes with health that are realistic with some of their key pitchers, you can tell yourself, yeah, that actually feels just right. And I'll say that formally. I think 81.1 is just right.
Whoa.
Even though
you're saying that and giving them a B?
I'm waffling. I'm waffling.
Oh,
here.
Guess what? I'm saying it's too cold, and I gave him a C.
Oh, well, you've been called out for maybe dropping as many as 22 too colds last year on 30 teams.
I'm turning over a new leaf. Yes, in the first episode, I was too hot on 2 of them.
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll see how that holds up over the course of these next 2 weeks. I don't know how it's possible to say this because words actually mean something, but 81.1 feels just right relative to what's on paper and what goes in. And I'm like, they're going
to win 81.1 games.
Yeah. It's like, that feels about right based on where everybody's at with this team, but if they exceed expectations again, if I pick them to win the division again, don't be surprised, I guess.
So why can't that be infuriating? Like I'm basically saying I think they'll win 83 or 84 games. I can still give them a C. This is how this makes intellectual sense to me, is that they were good last year, and let's say they overreached a little bit, but they were good. They could have capitalized on it. They made postseason money. They could have used the money they made in the postseason to invest in this team and make it more as good as last year's team on paper. You know what I mean? And they could have just kept building, and they could have kept the timelines going because they still have minor leaguers that are coming up. They still just just keep it going, dude. Like, why take this big step back at third base?
I just don't know if it's that big of a step back. I think Caleb Durbin's a nice player, but I think the combination of prospects and guys that they've brought in for depth can come pretty close. I think you outlined that case with Rengifo. I don't like to defend this position. It's a choice. Clearly, it's a choice to be made in ownership to choose to not spend more. I think the Brewers have a small TV deal. That's a fact. That limits some of what they're willing to do. But I think the problem comes down to this.
Very loyal customers in the park, though.
Yeah, of course. And look, when you're winning and you're running a tight budget, why would you expand the budget unless you felt like it's going to completely change the outcome? So unless you get to the point where you can convince ownership mid-season that you are an extra $10 to $15 million away, and you need to trade for 2 or 3 guys that actually cost a lot of money, and I'm talking prorated rest of season 10 to 15 million type guys. Unless you can convince them that's going to put you over the top and help you defeat the Dodgers and defeat the Mets and get through the NL and actually get to the World Series again, I think you're just gonna keep having to pull rabbits out of your hat. When you pull a rabbit out of your hat for $10 every year, the owner's going to come back and say, "Hey, do it again. Here's $10. Pull another rabbit out of your hat." Yeah. I'm not paying $20 for you to pull one rabbit out of your hat again. I just paid $10 for the last several years. That's what I think is happening here.
Yeah.
You've got Jackson Chourio down as an underrated bat. Explain.
Yeah.
I love Jackson Chourio. How is he underrated?
What's his ADP?
Oh, I don't know, like 18?
Okay, let me make my case real quick. It has to do with this chart. This chart is based on comps, just like the other charts. It's barrel rate, max EV, hard hit. I think I used some defense, but not heavily, and base running. But the biggest thing that goes into this chart that I found comps on is the fact that Jackson Chourio is 21 years and 11 months old. So I just took people that had when I just said, hey, how many people have had 900 plate? He's had 900 plate appearances by the time they turned 22. The list was only 40 deep, and it had multiple future Hall of Famers on it, right? And so I decided I would cut that list down a little bit more to make it more legible for people. And once I got down to it, I found guys that had equal walk rates, strikeout rates. The comp average 104 WRC plus in that beginning. He had 115, so he's already a little better than them. But they were a little better than him defensively. But all the things line up. And here's the list. And I'm going to go backwards to forward. So the top one, I think, is actually the comp. And if you're looking, you already know. But anyway, Rougned Odor, Francisco Lindor, CJ Abrams. And here is my comp for Jackson Chourio, Manny MFN Machado.
Oh, but a Manny Machado that can play some center field. Okay.
And this is the other part of this. So Manny Machado, at 22 years old, had 2 seasons under his belt. They were pretty good seasons. He hit 260, 280. He had some homers. He did some stuff. I think he was playing shortstop at the time. In his third season in the big leagues, his third full season in the big leagues, Manny Machado had the best fantasy season of his career. He hit 286 with 35 homers and 20 stolen bases. I'm starting to buy into this third full season theory. And I just think that, like, I've done the stupid thing where I've been like, oh, well, Jackson Chourio's barrel rate's not that great, dude.
I know. I've lived it.
And
I was like, he's a kid. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm looking at these 2 years, and I'm like, dude, you did this before you turned 22. So, like, I think that the projections are all going to be like, yeah, he's going to hit a couple more homers, steal a couple more bases, be a little bit better. But I think there's a chance where he's just like, bam, I am now a 330-30 guy. Welcome me to the Superstars Club. And I don't even think that that's like a 5% chance. Like, I think there's like a 30% chance of that. You know what I mean? It might be crazy.
Like a top 5 player going into 2027. So,
well, who else becomes a top 5 player than someone who's like in the top 20 and happens to be 22 years old? You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're looking at Churio, Roman Anthony, Wyatt Langford. Like, it's guys like that can take the leap, right? Like, that's what you're ultimately looking for. Underrated reliever. Oh, I'll say underrated bat for me, Garrett Mitchell. I just think they're going to give him one last shot. Extreme negative health grade because of all the bad luck he's had. Keep an eye on him in the spring. You know, I don't think you have to draft him right now in the middle of February. I just say don't forget him. He's shown us an interesting combination of power and speed and great defense in center field.
Better than Perkins if he's healthy, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like, if he's actually healthy, yeah, I think that's going to happen. It might come with some swing and miss. It's kind of like a more banged-up version of Colton Cowser is probably the comp I would put on Garrett Mitchell right now in terms of my expectations. So just watch him closely in these next few weeks and see if he's actually healthy at this point. Underrated reliever, I said it before when we were talking about closers, Trevor McGill. I think he's the closer as long as he's healthy. And I don't know why Abner Uribe's ADP is quite as high as it is. I like Uribe. He made nice adjustments last year, but that's just the state of the bullpen right now.
Unhappy to find Trevor on the bad list that led the show today. But in terms of skills, I have no problems with him. He's an excellent reliever, and having done this job before, and Ashby, for what it's worth, has worse command than Trevor. So in terms of who I think could get the job, like if I had to gun to my head who has the job, I would say Trevor McGill has the job.
Right. I think it's McGill, Uribe, and then someone else. And Ashby's still a bit of a wild card for me. Really interesting skills, much like Tyler Wells, albeit with much higher strikeout rates working out of the pen.
This is why I wrote pass maybe on there, because I don't like that they're both so expensive where you're taking this shot. Like if I think it's 75% likely that Trevor McGill has a job, then I should get a 25% discount on where he's going, right? And I don't think I'm getting that. So Aaron Ashby is somebody that I think you could just draft in draft and holds and in saves plus holds. I think he's going to be a very important pitcher for them in that bullpen. I think he's going to be a great reliever for them. I don't think that they're going to reverse convert him at this point just because they've built up so much starting pitching depth in the meantime. And I think that actually is part of their plan too with Gasser and Sproat and all those guys, is that they're thinking that one of those guys will be their closer of the future. It's a possibility as well. So anyway, Ashby is just a good reliever. So I'm going to throw him there on my list.
Yeah, I think Gasser is a little more finesse, like long-term back-end starter for sure. But Sproat, if he needs to just shorten up the arsenal a little bit and let it rip, then I think you're right.
Harrison
he has that kind of high-end ceiling.
Chance of Harrison being an Ashby type too,
They have a type in Milwaukee, I guess. All right, one more team to get to. I'm sorry this is a long episode. If anyone's bothered by that, I didn't expect the Tony Clark news to jostle the rundown quite the way it did.
I also think in
today.
Season we're gonna be better at sort of.
We'll be tidy.
We'll
be tidy in season, but in this time of year we're gonna wax poetic a little bit. And maybe the Rockies will keep things a little more tidy because it's a little easier to figure some things out, and it's also easy to ignore a lot of their starting pitching from a fantasy perspective, which is not their fault. I think the state of the franchise right now is at least there's some change in the front office. There is a front office in place that maybe you can be a little bit more excited about. And I think kind of skipping ahead a little bit, the offseason grade for me, I just can't even give them one. Like, this is just a new group figuring out what they have, trying to implement change. You can look at the guys that are in and out and say, oh, they got Willie Castro and Jake McCarthy and Troy Johnston and Edward Julian. And the last three guys in that group are, depending on your level of fantasy baseball sicko, you may have actually drafted Troy Johnston before as a guy that you thought could break through with the Marlins in the past because he was a first base outfielder that had some speed and did some interesting things in the minors. I am that sicko. It's probably just me. But Julian's a guy we liked in Minnesota a couple years ago. McCarthy was on the fantasy radar for speed, at least in Arizona in the past. So I think the types of chances they're taking in very low-risk moves on the position player side are at least more interesting than they have been in recent years.
I give him a little B, a little
You're dropping
action.
a B. Wow,
Yeah,
you're giving them a better grade than the Brewers.
Well, what
Grading on a steep curve, I guess.
they have opportunity to offer people, as I was mentioning with the Padres. But what I'd like is that for the type of team they are grabbing people that are on waivers, trading for people that are on waivers. They're buying guys who are maybe 1.5 to 2 win players for $6 million a year in Willie Castro. So they bought more starting pitching this offseason than they did in the last 3 combined, it feels like, So they're doing stuff on a small level while I think hopefully trying to get up to speed when it comes to player development and technology and data, the stuff that they've been behind on. So, I'd be incomplete. I think you're right to say that it's hard to judge a new staff on what they do right away, but they didn't do anything real stupid, and they attacked the easiest part of the market to attack, which is the pitchers at the end of their rope. And did they overpay Michael Lorenzen? Yeah, but they gave him $8 million for 1 year.
It doesn't. It's inconsequential. It has no long-term negative consequence on them to do that.
That could be uncovering like a little bit of a strategy for them, which is, if you've got an $8 million 1 year guy, Colorado will give you 12 for one.
Yeah, so maybe they pay a slight tax on veteran arms that are in a position to say, well, it's either this or move to the bullpen. It's either this or take a minor league deal, like depending on the level you're talking about. So, I mean, I totally understand like why they have to operate in that sphere. For the existence of Coors Field, it's just been a place pitchers generally don't want to go. Like, it's understandably so. It's very, very difficult to pitch there. On the hitter side, I think you at least have 5 pretty clear and obvious guys that should play every single day. They have a shortstop, Ezequiel Tovar, who I think with health ends up being a nice value this year. Brenton Doyle, nice power-speed combo, has at least shown growth in his plate skills by lowering the K rate overall during his time in the big leagues, where I think a bounce back from him makes a lot of sense. Hunter Goodman's a nice success story for them. I think they brought in Willie Castro to play a role that just is every day, but maybe moving around to accommodate other things they want to try. So I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Be in a platoon, so maybe Castro plays at second against certain-handedness. And
sure, he's just all over the infield, but he's basically an everyday guy. And I think Jordan Beck is probably that 5th guy that plays every day, which then leaves the door open for them to platoon at any combination of the other 4 spots, depending on the defensive alignment. So they have at least built a roster that has some strength up the middle between catcher, short, and center field. Guys that play a ton at all 3 spots. They're 3 best players, essentially. And now they can do the thing that a rebuilding team should do and take shots everywhere else.
Right, and it's a little unfortunate because I think a smart team will give Troy Johnston and Blaine Krim at least a month each to play at first base and to play regularly and see if they can be a long-term asset, because they have options, they have years of control, and they could be beneficial to the future of the Rockies if they are useful. I just not sure that they will be, and I'm a little bit impatient to get to Charlie Condon, and to see if he can be useful. But I think he's a second half player for them if they want to kind of run through all the different options and make sure that these other guys aren't going to contribute in the future. So, I don't have that much hope for Kyle Karros, but I think he's going to also get a chance in the same way. Ryan Ritter and Kyle Karros' numbers leave me completely cold. But I believe that they are probably 2 of the 4-man bench, along with Jake McCarthy. So, and then Fulford at catcher. I think that's their whole bench. And I'm not interested in most of the first base or any of that bench. And I don't love Jake McCarthy. I hate the pitching staff. It's
just going to take so much time. Yeah, that B made no sense. We're going to stick to incomplete on the graphic, just because I really don't think they had enough runway to completely do the things that we expect Paul DePodesta and Josh Burns and that front office to start to do. I just think it's the beginning of a new era, hopefully a more exciting era for Rockies fans. I think the last kind of player that kind of pushes toward that everyday or near everyday roles, at least a big side platoon guy, and that's Mickey Moniak. I think, much like Brenton Doyle, some improvement in his K rate has made him a bit more interesting. There's power, there's some speed. Going in and out of Colorado is going to make his life difficult, but I do think there's a better floor for Mickey Moniak than I was previously giving credit for. The bench guy that I think could play maybe more than the projections suggest is still Tyler Freeman. We just like him, I think, because he gets on base a lot. He's projected for a 350 OBP, which is the highest on the team by ATC. Can play enough spots well. He doesn't strike out. Just seems like a player that could actually take advantage of that ballpark. So I wouldn't be surprised if Tyler Freeman, because of his versatility, ends up pushing his way up a little bit in terms of playing time over the course of the year.
Yeah, I wonder, maybe Karras doesn't even make this team because you got Fulford, you got Ritter. You need to have Ritter. You need to have McCarthy. That's 3. You could list Freeman as a starter at DH, and then that opens up one more bench spot. So that's either Blaine Crim or Kyle Karras.
Yeah. So that's where things stand on the position player side. Condon, who you mentioned, could be interesting before the end of the season. Probably more of an in-season pickup in a lot of leagues than someone you're trying to hold on to in the early part of the year, barring some unforeseen changes during the course of spring training. Ariel Amador could also, if he starts to click, carve out a larger role than expected to. So they're not without interesting players. Like that's the thing that I at least like about the position player group. We don't have to go into great detail on the pitching because I just think it's generally unusable for fantasy purposes. There's just not enough here to get excited about. If you said there's one interesting starting pitcher to think about in a really deep league, it's probably Chase Dolander.
Yeah, I think his away stats were interesting. He had a 3.5 ERA away from home. He has a good cutter curve combo. Theoretically, could be useful in at least the cutter itself is one of the better pitches for a Coors Field scenario. The command wasn't there, and he had a really interesting prospect grade on Fangraphs for his command. I looked at it. What was it? It was like 45-60.
Yeah, 45. I feel like I don't see a lot of 45-60s.
So they're saying his command's not good now, but he looks like he should have good command. Which, sure, I don't know. The location plus was pretty bad, 92 location plus. But maybe there's something to like. Maybe it's just going to take him a little time because the pitches move differently when he's away and home. That's got to affect your command a little bit. Anyway, I had Chase Dolander away from home ? And that's the best I can do.
Yeah, that's all I could do. Otherwise, it's probably just a nope for me. A lot of veterans just trying to keep their careers going and maybe earn a trade mid-season to be depth options for contenders. Seth Helverson's interesting in the bullpen. I think that's the other way you could think about it. Maybe take a shot on someone for saves because they're a likely last place team, but they're not horrendous. They will generate some save chances, and we have seen at least some decent reliever seasons from closers over the years in Colorado.
Halverson has better model numbers than Vodnik. I was surprised to see that, but significantly better model numbers. They both throw really hard, but the model likes the shapes on Halverson's pitches better. So, yeah, if you want to get the backup who will take Vodnik's job in Colorado, there you go. It's really hard, even on the hitter front. I picked Jordan Beck as my sleeper undervalued bat, and I've taken a couple shares of him. I like that he's right-handed and plays good enough defense to play on the field. I mean, and that he was good enough and young enough that this is a team that's going to run him out there maybe as much as possible. But when I ran the comps for Jordan Beck, Colton Cowser shows up on it, that's good, right? The problem is that Beck basically does everything that Cowser does worse. So Cowser's the best comp on Jordan Beck's list, if that makes sense. And Beck's not really on Cowser's comp list, Here are the comps that I came up with, and I didn't even want to show it because it was sad. Adalberto Mondesi, Jared Kelenic, Christopher Morel, and Gabriel Arias, along with Cowser and Beck. That's not what you want.
No, that is definitely not what you want.
He also had I think it was like an 11 WRC plus against righties away from home. Anyway, let's be nice and just say Beck is a young player that, he's going to his third season, full season in the big leagues. And, he could put together some things, and he obviously has the physical tools with the speed and some of the power to be interesting. And if the worst case scenario, you take him and you only start him at home, I think where he's going right now is sort of fourth outfield territory. That's a pretty good place to take somebody that you can play for, 400 plate appearances, 300 plate appearances.
I will blend a fun fact into my underrated bat. I've mentioned Ezequiel Tovar as someone that I think is just better from a fantasy perspective than people are giving him credit for right now. The fun fact is that he's hit 51 big league homers in his career. 27 of them have been hit on the road. So even though the average takes a hit outside of Colorado, he's at least showing that power base is legit. I think there's a chance he also gets a little better as a base stealer over time too. So that could be a way he props up some extra value. So still interested in Tovar. I like him as an MI in a lot of leagues. Don't want him as my starting shortstop just yet, unless it's a really deep league, but I do think he's a better player than people are giving him credit for right now. Real quick, Eno, because I am up against a meeting here in a couple of minutes. Bakota has a 61 win projection on the Rockies. Too hot, too cold, or just right?
Yeah, just right. I mean, one thing that does happen on the edges of these projections is that, they sell and they get worse at the deadline. And so maybe it is more like 55, 58, but
I think it's just right.
Correct. Yeah.
I think it's just right because they don't really have a lot that they are likely to be able to sell at this deadline.
True.
So they'll just keep playing it out, trying some interesting things. Maybe they're a little more pesky in September, right? Maybe they bring up a few young players. Maybe that's when we see Condon, and they have a few guys in there that are clicking. And going into Colorado late in the year can be a house of horrors because it's just a difficult place to play, right? So I don't know. Maybe they'll be a little bit more watchable. Hopefully for the sake of Rockies fans, they are. But we need to go on our way out the door. Reminder, you can join our Discord with the link in the show description. If you're in those listener leagues, be sure to keep an eye on your devices when your picks come up. Still having a lot of fun there. I think we're in round 5 of my draft right now, so probably getting a few more picks in before the end of the day. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.